So this is Mr. Tan, and today we're looking at project management. We're focusing on 217MANEL, and we're actually focused on questions 1 to 3, which we did in the first assignment, and we're doing the additional 3 questions, 4, 5, and 6. So we're actually doing questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So as always, we're going to obviously start off with looking at the questions in the assignment brief, because even though the task is provided in the assignment brief, we need to ensure that we answer all the questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because that's ideally what we're going to be graded, or you're going to be graded on. Then we're going to be looking at, in the assignment brief, the task layout and format that's been provided to you, which seems to be quite comprehensive, and all of you have that. And then within that kind of framework and task of a 3,000 word plus or minus 10% in a executive report format, you're gonna look at kind of like a traditional and agile type approach, but we're going to really be focusing on a traditional waterfall approach in terms of implementing a project. And then finally, we'll be looking at critical path analysis as well, and how you would actually implement a critical path analysis to this project. So looking at the questions first, question 1 says define a project, its characteristics, and the role of the project manager. So these first 3 questions you did in your first assignment, which was a poster presentation of 20 minutes. Question: justify the application of the theoretical frameworks and methodologies within a project environment. And there you looked at, you looked at a traditional approach given the case scenario, and you looked at a agile approach. And the case scenario in the first assignment was to review how you would select a company of your own choice, and then in the cubicle side of the operations, you would change it from a cubicle to an open plan. And then the third question was to critically calculate the composition and management of teams in a project environment. Okay, so again, in there we were really hoping you to get to focus on, a team effectiveness and what contributes towards team effectiveness in terms of the composition of the team, the work design, the processes, and so on and so forth. So the keywords for the first 3 questions. Question 1 was define, which means to state or describe exactly the nature, scope, or meaning of something. So define. Question 2, the keyword there was justify, which means to show or prove to be right or reasonable. Justify, to prove to be right or reasonable. And then in question 3, critically evaluate. There you must provide your own opinion or verdict on whether an argument or set of research findings is accurate. Next 3 questions. So that's the first 3 questions. You've actually covered these before in the first assignment, so you should be familiar with those. The second 3 questions says formulate a project management plan. Appraise measures to control and monitor project risk, quality, change, and configuration. And then question 6 says to evaluate project success and failure, and decimate the key learning points from the delivery of the project. Let's look at the keywords. So the keywords in question 4 was to formulate, to create or prepare methodology. In question 5, appraise, assess the value of. And question 6, evaluate, to weigh up, to look for the pros and cons. So, we've kind of given you a format to carry out this CID, and it includes an executive summary, an introduction, with what the project is all about. The project rationale. Why should this project go ahead? Risk analysis. Project plan and management. Project evaluation and closure. Conclusions and future changes. Now, in fact, when you actually look at all these, we're going to be doing these anyway, but when you do look at these, they kind of like follow the carrying out of a project plan. And the case example was to continue from the first assignment and to provide this report format of 3,000 words plus or minus 10%. Where you would actually carry out the planning of this project from a cubicle to an open space. So really, if you look at the assessment criteria and you look at the assignment task, it asks you to carry out this project plan, and the project plan, by carrying the whole plan out and the different elements and parts of the plan in detail, then you're actually meeting the assessment criteria. I mean, you're obviously going to be reviewing the project life cycle, the different stages of the project. You're going to be reviewing the project management process. You're going to be viewing the project management process in terms of the initiation stage, the planning stage, the execution stage, the control and monitor stage, and then the closing stage. And then within each of these stages, as you will see as we go further down, in the initiation stage, you'll be looking, at various elements, including the, development of the project charter and the, identification of key stakeholders and stakeholders in general. And then, when we move into the planning stage itself has various areas, including, the project requirement, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, the budget, and then additional things like risk, quality, and control and standards. So and carrying out all these issues and elements, that's the planning stage. And then from the planning stage you get the the scope baseline, and then you have the execution stage, and then the monitor and control stage, and then the closure stage. And these are all processes which we will see, and we mustn't really get confused between the two things, which we'll come back to in a second. So let's just look at the definition of a project. And the definition of a project includes, or says, it's a temporary endeavour undertaken to accomplish a unique product or service. It's a Pen Book Guide 2000. Says that project management is the application of processes, methods, skills, knowledge and experience to achieve specific project objectives according to the project acceptance criteria within agreed parameters. Project management has finite deliverables that are constrained to a finite timescale and budget. It seems so. You've got various goals there in terms of what you're trying to achieve, in terms of the project, in terms of increased efficiency, greater productivity, greater staff motivation, increased communication from this task requirement. But ultimately, the reason why you're trying to do this project in the first place, what are you trying to achieve from it? Now, when we look at this type of approach, we're going to be going through in detail the different sections within a project life cycle. But there are two different parts within a project, and there's the project life cycle and there's the project management process. Now, the project life cycle are the different stages which is relevant to your project that the project will go through. What is stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4? What are those stages? And then the management process is the elements of management to control getting each stage done, and these consist of 5 elements, which consists of the initiation stage, as I said, the planning stage, the execution stage, the monitor and control stage, and then finally the closure stage. And then within each of those stages, there will be additional stages that would need to be completed. Now, if we look at the different stages, so if you see this house, you can see there are different stages, and really the project management process in terms of, as I said, in terms of initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closure, would normally be in each one of these stages. But what normally happens is that we don't really apply it to each stage. What we really do is apply those 5 areas of the process groups to the whole project. So the whole process of initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closure would be applied to all of these as one whole. But instead of doing that management process for each stage, so you do it all together in one go. So this traditional approach involves a series of consecutive stages in the project management process. It's a step-by-step sequence to design, develop, and deliver a product or service. It entails achieving the succession in implementation process, provides the benefits of milestones, planning, and team building. So this is based on the project life cycle. Okay, so the project life cycle will be based around this. So stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So with the task at hand, you've been asked to look at the changing from your office space from a cubicle to open space. So you need to then say to yourself, what is stage 1? What is stage 2? What is stage 3? What is stage 4? What are the different stages that you want things to be done in? So stage 1 could be the clearing the whole office and removing everything. Stage 2 could be looking at and building the new design. So what are the different stages that you're looking at doing things? So you would need to come up with the different stages in terms of the office design. When we look at a traditional approach now, we go into the process groups, as I've said, and I'm going to keep talking about the process groups because it's important. So the project management process, as I said, is different to the different stages in your project, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, because the project management process is actually completing the different stages one after the other. Hence the reason why traditional approach or waterfall approach, where you finish stage 1 before you do stage 2, and then you finish stage 2 before you finish stage 3. But at the same time, you've got this management process going on, including the initiation, planning, executing, management, control and monitoring, and closing. So and then within each of these, as you will see, there are different sections. So let's have a look at the initiation. We'll have the development of a project charter and to identify stakeholders. So and so the fulfilling the preconditions, defining the project objectives. The necessity of the project, the feasibility of the project, whether or not it can actually be achieved, in the main instrument for decision, project charter, in a final statement of scope, objectives, and participants. So we're going to have a look at developing a project charter in a second. But again, this project charter is important because it tells us what the objectives are, what the purpose is, what the key roles and responsibilities are in some of them. So who are the key stakeholders are, because it's important to know these and also to know what the responsibilities are of these key stakeholders, to know that you're actually meeting their needs. The key stakeholders could be the key people who are funding this project. So again, very important. Now, when we look at the project charter, so this is what you're going to have to do. The first thing you're going to have to do is to look at, the different stages in terms of what you're trying to achieve. What are the different stages of the project life cycle? And then once you've decided what the project, the different stages are of the project life cycle, you then need to say to yourself, well, okay, the first part, in the management process side is the initiation side, and then the first thing in the initiation would be the project charter. So you would need to produce a project charter now for your project. So after dealing with a project to work on it, it is important to formalize projects. A project charter is a document that formally recognizes the existence of a project and provides direction on the project's objectives and management. Okay, very important on the project's direction and the project's objectives. Key project stakeholders should sign a project charter to acknowledge agreement on the need and intent of the project. And this all leads into later on the scope in terms of what you're trying to achieve, also by reviewing the needs of the different stakeholders. Let's have a look at this project charter. Here are some, different examples of project charters as well. Here we can see, the project name, the creation date. We've got, the project description, the project purpose, the project goals and outcomes, and so different projects and different project charters will have different information on them. But predominantly, as we saw in the video, you kind of like want a project charter to you want them to include a little bit more detail, the project date, the project objectives, the project approach here, and you've got the roles and the responsibilities of the people who are going to be working in the project. So ideally, you need a statement of the problem statement, the business need, the SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time specific. How long it's going to take. But we know how long this project is going to take because in the assignment brief it said it should take between 1 and 3 months. So you've got your time there in terms of what you want to look at. Then you've got your scope, and then your team, and then possibly milestones that you might have during the project. And then we said that within the initiation stage. The initiation stage had two parts. One was the project charter, which you would need to produce for your project, and then the second thing that you would need to do is to identify who the key stakeholders are. Who are the key stakeholders directly involved? It could be, who is actually authorizing this? Is it your bosses? Are they the directors? Who's actually authorizing you to spend this amount of money to change their office system from cubicles to open space? You need to include, the people who are going to be working there, contractors, suppliers, any local government in terms of regulations, in terms of changes, in terms of building changes. So again, you need to detail and justify who those stakeholders are. Stakeholders with a direct interest, stakeholders of standing, legislative agencies, indigenous groups, commissioner for who would these people apply, and broader stakeholders. So within here, within the initiation stage, you really need to look at your project charter, and then the details of your project charter, and then the stakeholders. Who are the key stakeholders, and how much importance do they have in relation to your your project? Then as we saw in the project management process, the project management process had 5 stages. The first stage was the initiation stage. The next stage is the planning stage, and in the planning stage there are kind of like 6-ish type areas there. If we look at the planning approach, we have to look at the project requirements, the scope, which is very important. Well, all these elements are important, but the scope is very, very important. The work breakdown structure, very, very key. Schedule, budget, and then other areas include, quality, risk, HR, communications. But so we won't be talking about all those additional areas, but we will be definitely covering project requirements, scope, work breakdown structure, schedule, budget, and risk as well. So what are the project requirements? Well, the project requirements, in order to describe the needs of a project, as a result of the project managers or a small subset of project team members write the requirements for the stakeholders. These requirements are then routed throughout the organization in an attempt to gain alignment and buy-in. Often the requirements are not uniformly understood, and they do not represent the full breadth of the project needs. So, some people could argue you really need to get all the stakeholders sometimes into one room to find out exactly what the requirements are. If you can get all the key stakeholders into, one meeting and then hammer out exactly what everyone's requirements are, then that would be good. Because if you think about it, if you're a key stakeholder, you're really going to be looking for the top or the best of the best. You're not going to be taking into consideration time frames. You're not going to be taking into consideration budget. If someone says to you, what are your requirements, then normally you're going to be, asking for the best of the best. and you're not really going to be looking or taking other things into consideration, like the project manager would take into consideration, and to see if these things were workable and compatible. So, you know, how you get these requirements is important, but get all the stakeholders involved and get them into one room talking, and let them hammer out exactly what everyone needs, and then come to some compromise and some agreement. Then after we've looked at, onto the planning stage, we had 6 areas, and the first area were the project requirements, and then the second area was the scope. So let's look at what we mean by the scope. So, the scope planning, is very, very important, which leads into the work breakdown structure as well. So obviously in the planning stage, you have the requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, the budget, risk. So, after completing the scope planning, the next step is to further define the work by breaking it down into manageable pieces. Here we go from the scope planning now, we go into the work breakdown structure, which is absolutely key to any project being met on time, within budget, and to the standards and quality levels that you actually want to meet. It helps to improve the accuracy of time, cost, and resource. Estimates defines a baseline for performance measurement, and project control aids in communicating clear work responsibilities. Scope planning and the scope statement. A scope statement is a document used to develop and confirm common understanding of the project scope and what it should include. Justification, a brief description of the project's products, a summary of the project's deliverables, a statement of what determines project success, what exactly are you trying to do, and to what boundaries are you working to, which is absolutely key, because then that will affect your complete work breakdown structure, and then that will in turn affect your costs. Well, when we look at the scope verification, and scope change control, because there may be changes as well as you're going along, and people may want slight changes. It's very difficult to create a good scope statement and work breakdown structure, for a project. It's even more difficult to verify a project on scope and minimize scope changes. Many projects suffer from scope creep and poor scope verification. And again, you're going to hear this phrase again and again, scope creep. When you've actually agreed everything with the stakeholders, and then there are slight changes or not enough detail put in to actually state exactly what that entailed, and that other people thought that, oh, they took it for granted that would include this and it would include that, but whereas it doesn't include these things, so they want these things to be added now. So scope creep, because normally people don't want to pay any more money for additional things that they look for, and they still want it done in the same time. So yeah, it's very difficult. Fox Mayer drug filed for bankruptcy after scope creep on a robotic warehouse crept in. There's many areas and examples of this where scope creep can help your project to fail due to changes, due to people wanting additional things, due to things not being understood and correct in the first place. And so, additional changes need to be made, and which costs more and which takes more time. So once we have the scope, and you've got the scope detailed, and you've kind of agreed it and worked it with the key stakeholders and stakeholders at large, so you kind of like have the scope statement, and you have a work breakdown structure, and then you have a work breakdown structure dictionary to actually clarify exactly what these things mean. So very, very important. And the work breakdown structure is actually key to the success of the whole. I mean, each element is key, but the breakdown structure helps you to control every element and control what's required, and work out the costs involved. And then you can, once you know the work breakdown structure, you can then really try to apply degrees of risk to it as well, to see what could or could not happen. So when we look at the work breakdown structure, it's a deliverable orientated grouping of the work involved in a project that defines the total scope of the project. So the work breakdown structure is literally the different details of the different sections and subsections within those sections to determine exactly what is required to do this. It's a foundation document in a project management because it provides the basis for planning and managing project schedules, costs, and changes. So here you can see below, within the planning stage, we are looking at project requirements, scope, and then moving into the work breakdown structure. If you can remember, in the process, you had the initiation stage, which included the project charter and the key stakeholders, and then the next stage was the planning stage. The planning stage, which includes these kind of like six different areas, can be more. But remember, this management process lies within the different stages of the whole project. Okay, so again, when you're looking at that, that is called the project life cycle. The project life cycle, which this management process works within that project life cycle. It's important to understand the difference between the two, that this is a management process that helps you achieve the project life cycle. So please, now we're going to see some examples of work breakdown structures, which will have different sections and subsections within them. So you might, for instance, have the intranet site content, and then within that section, you might have different sections: articles, links, ask the experts, use, requests, features, templates, and tools, and so on and so on. And you keep breaking it down and breaking it down till you come to the elements where you can actually put a cost and time to each of these. We are going to look at this work breakdown structure to gain more of an insight into it. We looked at the work breakdown structure, and then on the video it led on to a critical path, and we will be doing a critical path, and I'll be showing you how to do a critical path at the end of all of this. That will be done after looking at a little bit on agile methodology, and then at the end we'll be looking at critical path analysis, and I'll be showing you how to calculate critical path analysis and applying it to your project. Can't stress the importance enough of the importance of the work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown structure into its elements and then sections, and then subsections and elements within those sections, and breaking it down into its lowest common denominator, so you can't break it down anymore, so then you can accurately estimate what things are going to cost. And then if you know what things are going to cost and what you're going to buy, then you know possibly how long it will take to get these things. So doing this work breakdown structure also helps you to meet the needs of the scope, to see in fact if the work breakdown structure is actually meeting the scope of your project, the aims and objectives, and what was agreed with the stakeholders in the initiation stage of this management process in terms of the charter, the project charter, and the stakeholder analysis. So, basic principles for creating a work breakdown structure: a unit of work, should appear at only one place in the work breakdown structure. The work content of the WBS item, is the sum of the WBS items below. A work breakdown item is the responsibility of only one individual, even though many, people may be working on it. The work breakdown structure must be consistent with the way in which work is actually going to be performed. It should serve the project team first, and other purposes only if practical. Project team members should be involved in developing the work breakdown structure to ensure consistency. Very, very important to get the people who are involved involved into the work breakdown structure, because they may actually say, well, actually you need this and this and you're missing this, or you need to take this into consideration. Each work breakdown structure item must be documented to ensure accurate understanding of the scope of work included and not included in that item. And the work breakdown structure must be a flexible tool to accommodate inevitable changes, while properly maintaining control of the work content in the project according to the scope statement. Okay. Again, like in the video, we saw an example of the different sections of a work breakdown structure and then the subsections of it, and then you should be breaking this down as far as you need to break it down to try and determine exactly what's needed for each section and for each subsection, and what these items are and how much it's going to cost and how long it would take to accrue these or to complete these tasks. So very, very important document. Now, when we look at the work breakdown structure, we also need a work breakdown structure dictionary. And a dictionary helps you to classify and clarify exactly what things mean, because sometimes on the work breakdown structure there may not actually be enough detail within that section or element to break it down to say exactly what it contains, so as not to misunderstand what that item contains when you think it contains one thing and then it doesn't contain that, which could eventually incur more costs and time to do. So for instance, like if we look at this for the work breakdown dictionary for the fixing of a small sailing boat, frames completed, this includes both the hull and deck frames. I may need assistance from a local carpenter with woodwork to be decided later. So you're actually saying, what parts of the boat, what it includes, and where and who you might need assistance from, and so on and so forth. So you're putting this in terms of the work breakdown structure dictionary. Very, very important as well to clarify all the points. Yeah, very, very important. If you ask someone to fix a door onto your house, You're saying them to fix the door. Well, what does it include? Does it also include to put on the handles and the lock? Does it also include to put on the brackets? Do they need to measure the door? Do they need to fit? What exactly does it include? Do you understand? So having that dictionary again helps you to clarify, so there is less misunderstandings. And then obviously, in as regards to the planning stage, we said that the planning stage had 6 areas. The project requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, and then the schedule. The schedule is kind of like where you schedule all the different sections and all the different elements out, which is different to a critical path analysis. But this is the time frame, and again, you can use many different tools for this. You can use Excel, and this is a Gantt chart, and you can put in dates for when specific actions and activities are supposed to occur, and the start time and the finish time, and when some other activities have to occur, but can only occur once one other activity has been completed. So one activity also might be linked to another activity and cannot be done until that activity has been done. When we look at costs, because the next phase on the planning side of the management process, from initiation planning and then planning, in terms of the different stages, you've got the budget and the costs. And there are several types of cost estimates and tools and techniques to help create. It is also important to develop a cost management plan that describes how cost variances will be managed on the project. Cost variances, how will cost variances be managed? And even though you give a cost for something, how many times have we seen that we ourselves are saying, well, it's going to cost this amount, but it actually costs more? It doesn't usually cost less. It always seems to cost more. And so what variance on the project are we going to put on those costs in terms of going over our expected target or budget? When we look at types of cost estimates, we can see it from a rough order magnitude, very early in the project life cycle. Well, you have why done, how accurate, maybe -20 to +75%. Then you can have a budgetary early, 1 to 2 years out, -10 to +25, or definitive when you've gone deeper into the project and exactly a better estimate in terms of what these costs are. Later on in the project, 1 year out, it provides detail for purchase estimate and actual costs, -5% to +10%. So exactly what are these cost estimates? The cost estimates will obviously be dependent upon the different times that you're trying to do this. And also, when you're trying to put costings down, one way to do this is to have your work breakdown structure. So if you've got your work breakdown structure, all you're doing, you're putting the different sections of the work breakdown structure and then the subsections. So the sections could be manufacturing, electronics, rigging, and testing. And then the subsections could be materials decided, materials procured, frames, and so on and so forth. And then what you do is you add, either actual or budgeted costs to these, and then at the end you total it all up. But bear in mind this, there will be some variances in this budget. It's not going to be 100% accurate. There will be either a plus or minus percentage on these, and you'll have to allow for that. So when we're looking at the cost baseline, normally you take the project cost estimate, and then you take any contingency estimates, and then the management reserves. And these 3 things together, the project cost estimate, the contingency estimates, and the management reserves in terms of what they were allocated to the budget, is your total cost budget baseline in terms of, what, that's it. That's what it must not go over in terms of being successful and being within budget, on time, to the quality. So we've looked at the areas of project requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, and the budget within the planning stage. Within the planning stage of the project management process within the overall life cycle stage of the whole project. So you have the life cycle stage, the project management process. We did the initiation stage, which included the charter and the key stakeholders. Now we're still on the planning stage, and within the planning stage we looked at project requirements, scope, work breakdown structure, schedule, budget, and now we're going to bring in risk. So, because one of the questions in the assignment brief also touched upon risk and risk management. So, these are the steps, 4 steps for managing risk in a project, which includes risk identification. Analyze the project to identify sources of risk, known risks. So, step 2, risk assessment. Assess risks of, in terms of severity of impact, likelihood of occurring, controllability. Risk assessment, risk response development, develop a strategy to reduce possible damage, develop contingency plans, and then risk management plan, risk, response control, implement risk strategy, monitor and adjust a plan for new, risks, change management. So you need to look at this because, I was speaking to one builder and he was saying to me that he was working for a company and they had different projects on the go. So they might have this small, building construction company had different projects and many different people working for them. And people will be working on all these projects at the same time. And what he found was that, what was one of the factors that caused time to go over. And if time went over, it meant that the contractor would have to be paying their staff more money, which means that the total profit of the business would be less. And one of the reasons why a lot of times that staff were actually had to stop work was because they didn't have the materials. So they would be on site and they would take the materials that they would need and then they would run out of materials. Well, then they would have to go down to their hardware store, buy the materials that they want, and then come back. But then, why wasn't this properly planned out and taken into consideration? Where if you know that these are the materials that you want, to have an excess stock or have some type of system in place so that there is a central system or stock or of this whereby people can run out and give the appropriate stock to people, so that people are not stopping their work to go out and buy the materials that they need. So again, you can look at all different types of risk that could come up in the planning of the cubicle from a cubicles to an open space. What are the risks? What are the things that could happen? So you need to look at this and you need to kind of use this model and come up with some areas of risk that you think might occur with your company example and your project. Have a look at risk. So let's look at risk identification. Again, kind of covered it in the video as well, but let's look at this. A list of all the possible risks that could affect the project, okay, at different parts of the project as well. Within, the planning stage, within the execution stage, different parts and areas of it. Risk management team consisting of core members and other relevant stakeholders as well. Get the stakeholders involved as well to see what possible risks. The team uses brainstorming and other problem identifying techniques to identify potential risks. I mean, you might say why some people could look at this very negatively, but it's not. It's actually very positive to say what could potentially go wrong, and if you can foresee something happening before it's actually happened, then you can anticipate and you can take action against that. Organizations use a risk breakdown structures, RBS, in conjunction with the work breakdown structures to help management teams identify and eventually analyze risks. So, it is very important that you come up with the risk identification for your risks. So let's look at a risk breakdown structure. So again, if you have the different elements, and then within the different elements, you could attach risks to these. Scenario analysis is the easiest and most commonly used technique for analyze risks. Team members assess significance of each risk event in terms of, probability of the event and impact on the event. What could stop things from happening. Risks needs to be evaluated in terms of the likelihood the event is going to occur and the impact or consequences of its occurrence. In addition to evaluating, the severity or probability of risk, events, the team also assesses when the event might occur and its, detection difficulty. Do you understand? So you're actually taking time out here to see look at all the potential possibilities, the things which could go wrong. Maybe due to your own experience and what you've experienced before in other projects and so on and so forth, but taking these things into consideration so that you can actually take action and make sure that these things don't happen again. Because if you're not doing this due diligence, in essence, then you're going to be partially to blame if you haven't done this. As well as that, organizations categorize the severity of different risks into some form of risk assessment matrix. It is structured around the impact and likelihood of the risk matrix. So, define conditions for, impact scales of a risk or major project objectives. Again, we can see the cost, time, scope, and quality. Very low, low, moderate, high, very high. And we're kind of like producing a matrix to look at these and to see where the possible problems could occur. A risk response matrix as well. So you could have a risk matrix in terms of breaking down the kind of possibilities and percentage of that probabilities that risk could happen. And then you're actually saying, well, what would be the risk response what would be the response if these risks actually happened. And so again, you could have the risk event in this risk response matrix and then the response. So I would suggest that when you're looking at yours, you should have your risk breakdown matrix. You should have your kind of like degree or probability that these things could happen at certain elements within your breakdown structure. And then you can have your risk response matrix to determine what action you would actually take if that event actually happened. So, we've only just looked at the initiation, which included the charter and the stakeholder analysis, and then the planning stage, which included all the different sections, including the budget, the work breakdown structure, including the planning, initiation, executing within that. but then within the planning stage, the project requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, the budget, and now the risk. So after we've kind of like looked at the risk and we've done the planning, the next stage really within the management planning process is going to be the execution, carrying it out, actually doing all these tasks. So, the project execution plan, project execution is the roadmap used by the project team to deliver the agreed project outputs. It outlines the responsibilities of the project team and key stakeholders. Let's look at how projects and look at the coronavirus in the hospitals in China. I mean, this was, fast tracking and project crashing. So what you saw in that video was, China and building, 3, 4 story hotels literally within 9 days. Fast tracking where you got, the overall stages of the whole project. And what you're doing is if you've got 6 stages, what you're condensing those stages into 3 stages and doubling up on those stages, or project crashing, where you're getting a lot more people involved to crash the project in half the time. So if you've got 100 people doing a certain task and you want it to be done in half the time, maybe you need to get another 100 people to do another section, crashing the project, which we can see can actually take place. And when people really want to achieve what they really want to achieve with resources and meeting time frames, then you can if you've got the budget to do it. When we look at the traditional approach, the next thing after within the management process includes the monitoring and control. you know so in the process, as we said before, in the management process, you had the initiation stage and then the planning stage, and then we execute the project, meeting all the requirements in the work breakdown structure. But then we need to monitor and control it. So even though we're now talking about monitoring and controlling, in truth, at the time when the project is being executed, the different stages and the different breakdowns in terms of the work that is being carried out is being monitored, controlled at the same time as executing. You don't execute it and then monitor and control. No, it doesn't make any sense. So you're monitoring and controlling it at the same time as as it's being executed. So and the project control is the act of reducing the difference between the plan and the reality of the project. This is the last element in the plan, implement, monitor, control cycle of a project. Project manager uses the information from the monitoring process to get and keep a project on track. Very, very, very important time. When we look at the project control, this is the act of reducing the difference between plan and reality, the last element. So and the reason why you need project control is because you need to stop and prevent project creep. And project creep, as we've kind of touched upon and mentioned before, is people requesting changes or additions or things which were outside the scope, and they're trying to increase your scope boundaries. So many times I've seen that time and time again, where even in my own job, I work as a course manager for LCCA, and we had project coordinators to work out and track students' progress. They were made redundant and they were never replaced, and now the course managers have to track and monitor the progress of students. This is project creep. They're creeping and expanding the scope of what we're supposed to do when that was never part of our job roles and responsibilities in the first place. People do this all the time. So project control, defining it and controlling it, is so important, because the more you go outside your scope is the more it's going to cost you more, and it's going to take a lot longer to actually complete. The purpose of project control is to make sure that you actually meet the plan, the process to identify the performance areas, to set the standards, as well as meeting the objectives. It's also meeting the objectives to the quality and the standards that you've actually set, meeting the stakeholders' needs. So that is also well within the scope. Measure performance, compare, and when things are not going right, the purpose of control is to take corrective action when corrective action needs to take place. And also when key stakeholders are saying no, they must have this change, and then you have to factor it in and you have no control over it, then you need to factor that in as well. So the question of control is it's all about balance. Balance in terms of too little control, and then you could be going outside your scope. You could incur more costs, and you could take longer to control the project. Or too much control, and you micromanage and you demotivate people. Again, people could make mistakes, and also people could be demotivated and be less productive and less efficient. So it also depends on how you manage people to get the work done in the most efficient and effective way. So again, these things need to be taken into consideration. So it's a question of balance. But we need to also take into consideration change control management, because I don't know if you've ever had any project. I've worked in many different projects, and if you've worked on any project, there's always changes. You never have a project from start to finish where you go according to plan without any changes taking place. So if we look at the flow chart in terms of change control management, number one, the request identification. Number two, you assess the change request. Okay. Number three, analyze it. Change request approval. Number four, and number five, request implementation. But at the same time, that also leads into point six, where it can be rejected or deferred at any given time. So again, these then need to be factored in, and then how it's factored back into your scope, your work breakdown structure in terms of your costs and your budgets, and getting all these agreed and signed up with stakeholders as well. So again, if you've got all the documentation there and you do have change, then you can justify why things cost more, or why it took a little bit more time, because of changes that needed to be made and were specifically requested by key influential stakeholders. The purpose of control management systems, very, very important. Identify proposed changes, list the expected proposed changes on schedule, evaluate, as we said, negotiate and resolve conflicts of change, communicate changes to parties affected and assign responsibility for implementing change, adjust master schedule and budget, track all changes. Again, changes will mean a lot of changes to the different elements and different sections of the whole life cycle of the project, and getting the right teams to know exactly that there is a change and who's going to do what and how is that going to affect other teams. What's going to be the impact? So you know, you need to have a system of change management, but also control change management systems as well. The benefits of control management systems include cost savings, you know integrated in the work breakdown structure and performance, as we mentioned before. Allocation of use of budget and management of reserve funds are tracked. Responsibility for implementation is clarified. Effect of changes is visible to all parties involved. And implementation of changes monitored. And scope changes will be quickly reflected. Again, a lot of these things we've actually mentioned before, but these are the benefits. So it's to have a working document to say exactly what you've done and why you've done it, and to justify each action, especially if you go over budget or over time. Again, we mentioned this before, controlling changes and scope creep. Changes can drive higher costs and stretched out schedules, so controlling them is an essential project management task. So you must have that formal change system in place, and it must be approved. See, once you get the approval and the right stages signed off by people, then that is approved and that is worked into the whole structure, and then why it's costing more and why it's taking more time. So the last stage in the management process is going to be the closure stage. So you might think there's not too much to the large stage, but just to reiterate what we said, the management process includes the initiation, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and then the final stage here is the closure. So in the closing stage, you still have to tie up various loose ends. You still have to get the agreement and approval of the stakeholders that they are happy. They're happy and that you've actually finished the project and you've met their, key criteria. It's an act of gaining stakeholders' continuous acceptance of the final products and services. Even if the projects are not completed, they should be formally closed in order to reflect, on what can be learned in, to improve future projects. Therefore, it is not necessary to complete the project in order to close it. So you can close projects without having to, complete them. But even when you do complete them, you still need to finish off all your documentation, finish all your administration off. You still need to get acceptance, and you still need to get the approval from stakeholders that all the criteria have been met, and so on and so forth. And then after that, you then need to evaluate the project. Evaluate what went well, what didn't go so well, what lessons can be learned to help you that when you're looking at the next project, to see that you don't make the same mistakes. So again, that's also a very important part of the closure stage. When we're looking at closure, in one of the videos they talked about net present value, interest rate of return, accounting rate of return. You kind of like looked at these formulas before in the previous two terms, when we've looked at all these accounting ratios and project ratios. But there are other ratios as well in terms of estimating value, and these include earned value. So for instance, if you complete if it costs you £1 million and you've completed 20%, then you've got value in there of £200,000. But then you've also got the growth default calculation, where what this calculation is basically saying is that even though you can't see any benefit to it, and the benefit may be at a level which levels off for a long period of time, but then the growth default calculation shows that after that time it grows exponentially, so it just grows, just takes off in one go. So in other words, don't give up and don't stop, keep going up if you use the growth default calculation approach. We have now covered the project. We've covered the the life cycle, the project life cycle, in terms of the different stages, which please remember that's different to the project management process. And within the project management process, we said that we had the initiation stage, the planning stage, the executing stage, the monitoring, controlling, and the closure. And with the initiation stage, we said that we had to develop the project charter, and we had to identify key stakeholders. Okay, and then in the planning stage, we said we had project requirements. You had to do the scope, very, very important. And then from the scope, you complete the work breakdown structure, and then the schedule. And then you can schedule using a Gantt chart, complete a budget. You can use the work breakdown structure, and then have the element sections and then sub elements, and then have costs next to those. And then the other thing that you must bring into here is the risk, and the risk modules, and the possible things that could go wrong, and how you anticipate for these things. So you need to look at what potential risks are involved, and that led into the scope baseline. In terms of the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown dictionary. Okay, and then following that, we led into the executing stage, carrying it out, monitoring, controlling, and we saw some models of monitoring, controlling, and then finally the closure stage. Okay, so that is the whole process, and you need to apply this to the project that you have. The project that you have in terms of selecting the company that you selected in the first assignment, and then um, and then changing it from a cubicle space to an open plan space. So you need to go into detail in this, and it must be done in detail. You need to take your time, and you need to go into detail and to provide this information. Okay. So we've looked at a traditional waterfall type approach in different stages, step by step. But just want to touch on, like we touched on in the first assignment, agile methodology. Modern project management methodologies. Modern methodologies do not focus on a linear process, but they provide an alternative look at project management. Some of these methods are best for IT and software development, while others can be implemented in production processes, in improvement, production engineering, and so on. So let's have a look at another type of approach, agile methodology. So we touched on agile there. The key features of agile: short-term delivery cycle, sprints, agile requirements, dynamic team culture. It's less restrictive and project control, emphasis on real-time communication, and you have a lot of teams, a lot of cross-functional teams. But it's not necessary for all projects. It's more necessary for where you don't have a clear idea exactly what you're trying to achieve, what you're actually doing, and how you're going to get there. So when things are less clear, agile project management seems to be the better option. This methodology aims to empower teams, encourage customer involvement, and manage change or risk throughout the project. The focus with this methodology is on the development of teams, projects, monitoring, and the responsiveness of change, with continued communication being an important aspect throughout the project life. I mean, this allows you to go back through the stages as well. It allows you to make changes, whereas a traditional waterfall approach does not allow you to do that. It should be noted that agile project management is not one set method, but a family of methods designed to respond to the challenges of unpredictable projects. But I think that the project that you guys are doing regards to the office space and changing the cubicles from the cubicles to an open space, in my opinion, it's not an unpredictable project. That is quite a predictable project. The principles of agile way of working. Agile philosophy concentrates on empowering people and their interactions, and early the constant delivery of value into the enterprise. Agile project management focuses on delivering maximum value against business priorities in the time and budget allowed, especially when the drive to deliver is greater than the risk. Okay. And the other elements of agile, the project breaks down a requirement into smaller pieces, which are then prioritized by the team in terms of importance. It promotes collaborative working, and it has to, effective communication, teamwork, as we said before. It reflects, learns and adjusts at regular interviews to ensure that the customer is always satisfied, because you've got the interaction with customers as well. you know it integrates planning with execution, allowing an organization to create a working mindset that helps a team to respond effectively to changing environments. So again, when you've got the planning stage and the execution stage at the same time to integrate it, then you're saving time. You're not having to wait for for one stage to be done. You're integrating both of them together. And so if we look at, um, for instance, completing a software code, we can see if we use the traditional waterfall approach on the left hand side, it could take longer. But in the agile approach, you can actually put more sections and subsections, like combining in the planning and execution stage together. So you're actually condensing in them into different iterations, different sections. Okay. So you've got irritation 1, 2, and 3, and we can see that within each of these, what is actually what actually wants to happen in an agile approach as opposed to a traditional approach. Again, you have the characteristics of agile versus traditional, and you know you have kind of like the organizational structure is traditional is linear, whereas characteristics of agile scale of projects is small and medium scale, traditional larger scale. And again, so you can see the differences here. Agile approach, the involvement of clients is high, where in a traditional approach the involvement of clients is low. And in my mindset, you don't need a high level of clients involvement or stakeholders involvement when you're actually doing the project step by step. you know Escalation management, when problems occur, the entire team works together to resolve it. When the escalation to managers when the problem arises, and so the managers actually take care of it. So you can see the differences between traditional and agile. For me, my view is that I think traditional approach, sequential, you know what you want to do. it's not complicated, it's not difficult, and the objectives and names are quite clear in terms of what you want for the cubicle changing to an open space. So I'm going to briefly just touch on teams and team effectiveness. Obviously, in terms of stages of group team development, you've got storming, forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjoining. Forming when a team comes together, storming when the personalities and you may have certain levels of conflict levels within that team, and then the norm starts to happen, so you get norming in the team, and then hopefully you get performing, and once the project is achieved and you've achieved your objectives, then you get adjoining, and then the team members break up and go back to the respective department. This slide here that a lot of you didn't really talk about in your first assignment, in terms of what makes team effectiveness, and the team of people, you need to state the team of people that's going to be working with you, and you need to specify who are these people, what are their roles and responsibilities, who are going to get you to carry out your work breakdown structure and the execution of your planning stage. Who are the people? What is the context? Do you have adequate resources? Do you have leadership and structure there? Is there a climate of trust, performance evaluation, and reward systems for achieving, small targets? What about the composition of the team? Do the right people have the right abilities to do what they need to do? Do they have the right personalities to actually mix in the team composition? Are the diversity there? Is the size of the team too small or too large? If it's too large, it may not work. If it's too small, you may not have enough people. What about member flexibility? Are the people in the team flexible enough to do what you want them to do? The work design of the team, the autonomy. What type of, do you have autonomy there? What about skill variety, task, identity and task significance? And then the process, the process in terms of specific goals. This is where your whole planning and all the different sections come into play. When you think about the initiation stage of the management process, initiation stage, including the project charter and the identity of the key stakeholders, and then the planning stage, the process, the planning stage including the requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, the budget, the risk, all these things. Do you have all these in place? Team efficiency. What about the conflict levels in the team? And social loathing, because these things need to be taken into consideration. I remember putting the best team of in my hospitality class. There was these top 4 students who I put into one group, and because they wanted to work together and they chose to work together. But when it came down to the presentation, they delivered the worst presentation in the whole class. Why? When these students were all top producers in terms of quality of work. Well, they just couldn't get on together. There was just too much conflict in the team, and so they just could not perform. And subsequently, they all got a bad mark. So, if the conflict levels are too high there, then you're not really going to get team effectiveness. So when you look at team effectiveness, and team effectiveness equates to productivity, efficiency, and achieving your goals, and working through risk, working through problems, and change control management. So, you need to take into consideration the context, the composition, the work design, and the process. You've got to take these things into consideration. You can't ignore them in terms of team effectiveness. And a lot of you did ignore these, so please don't ignore these. Managing subsequent project meetings. Again, here is a general guidelines. Start on time, prepare and distribute an agenda, solicit recommendations and implement changes, assign good record keeping. In other words, how are you going to manage project team meetings? How is it going to be done? What type of leadership style are you going to adopt? How is it going to be done? So detail this in your work. So let's wanted to look at critical path analysis. And critical path analysis, as you saw in one of the videos earlier, kind of leads on to the work breakdown structure. And the critical path analysis allows you to break down the sequence of events, putting time frames and numbers on different sequence of events that need to occur. So critical path analysis is a planning and project management tool. Whilst it can help ensure a project is completed as quickly as possible and resources used efficiently as possible, it does depend on the accuracy of the information used. So obviously, it's only as good as the information provided. Just drawing up a CPA will not itself ensure a project runs to plan. Okay. Nearly all projects encounter some delay or something unexpected, so management tools such as CPA monitors projects and can swiftly, rectify any such problems. Most businesses use software packages such as Microsoft Project to draw up a CPA, a critical path analysis. Now, the CPA, sets out all the individual activities that make up a larger project. Okay, it shows the order in which these activities have to be undertaken. It shows which activities can only take place once other activities have been completed. It shows which activities can be undertaken simultaneously, therefore reducing the overall time taken to complete the whole project. And it shows when certain resources will be needed, for example, a crane to be hired for a building site. When we look at critical path analysis, we're saying to yourself, you need to create a list of all the activities required to complete the project. And you will have this because you will have this in your work breakdown project. So you can see how the critical path analysis will, follow on from your work breakdown project. What you do is you write out the time, the duration that each activity will take to complete. This data, would then be added. So the CPA calculates the longest path or planned activities to the end of the project, and the earliest and latest that each activity can start and finish without making the project longer. We are going to actually work in some examples of this, and I would like you guys to apply this as well to your project, to apply critical path analysis to your project. And which shouldn't be too difficult. As long as you've done your work breakdown structure, then you should have your critical path analysis. Okay, so in project management, a critical path is the sequence of project network activities which add up to the longest overall duration. This determines the shortest time possible to complete the project. Any activity delay on a critical path directly impacts upon a completion date. And please note that an additional parallel path through the network with the total duration shorter than the critical path is called a sub-critical or non-critical path. So we have subpaths going on within the overall critical path analysis. So drawing a network, so we use nodes. So in the video you heard nodes, and a node denotes the start and finish of each activity, and an arrow denotes the activity which has a duration. So and we move from left to right. We don't move from right to left. We move from left to right always, and it begins on its own. So B and then C may begin once A has finished. So you've got to finish A before B and C can start. But at the same time as C is starting, B is starting as well. So D may start once C has finished. Okay, but B has started before at the same time as C, but D can only start once C has finished. Again, if we put some times on this, the critical path analysis duration is 6 weeks to complete the entire job. So from point A, from number 1 A, we're looking at 2 weeks. Okay, so 2 weeks again plus 2 weeks. So A plus C plus D equals 2 plus 2 plus 2, which is 6 weeks. So we can see it takes 6 weeks to complete. So let's look at some rules of critical path analysis and networking. So we've got 6 rules here, and time always flows from left to right. Rule number 1. Rule number 2, the length of the arrow is of no significance. So the length of the arrow, no significance. All events except the first and the last must have at least one activity entering and at least one activity leaving. No activity may start until all preceding activities in the same sequence are completed. Number 2 activities can only have the same tail event and the same head event. This is all going to make sense to you when we see the examples. When we actually do the examples, this will make a lot more sense to you. Activities must start from a lower number event and end in a higher numbered event. Okay, this will make sense to you. So here's a dummy here. So we've got A and B, and there's a link between E. E follows D and C. Okay. Now, to make the required link A and B, and C needs to use the dummy activity. Otherwise, there would be no obvious dependent link between C and B. Okay. Now, the dotted line represents a dummy activity. This is used to ensure the logical dependence upon each activity is represented. So we're talking about the dependence affair of each activity being represented. Now we can see that C can begin only once A and B have been completed. But due to the direction of the arrow on the dummy activity, activity D is waiting only for B. So things we need to bear in mind here. So stick with this. We're gonna use an example in a minute. So stick with this, and this will make more sense to you once we use the example. So EST represents the earliest start time. EST is the earliest start time. And an activity may begin, which will depend upon the duration and order of the previous activities. And LFT, the latest time an activity must finish, so that the entire project can finish within the minimum duration time. Okay, so let me just say these again, because we're going to be using these in a second. So that is the EST, the earliest start time an activity may begin, which will depend upon the duration and order of previous activities. And LFT, the latest time an activity must finish, so that the entire project can finish within the minimum duration time. Okay? So here is how we use the node. So on the left hand side we have of this semicircle, we've got the event number. So is number 1 or number 2, number 3, number 4. So we won't be using this figure, but it just represents which one comes first, second, and third. And then we have the earliest event time, and then at the bottom right we have the latest event time. So the earliest event time is the earliest that this task can start, and we're saying the latest event time is the time that we must do this within, in order for the project to be completed on time and therefore on budget. So let's have a look at some numbers here now. So node numbers showing order activities in the left. So you've got number 1, number 2, so it shows this is the first node, and number 2 shows this is the second node. Okay, now A represents the first activity, and it's going to take if we're talking about days, 3 days. Okay, so and then B represents the second activity, and it's going to take 5 days. So arrows indicate the order of tasks. The above letter above shows the order, the time period below the arrow. Okay, so we're going to use an example, and then so we can see that the earliest start time is 3, because we've got let's have a look. So so if we can see, we have 3 here. So if it takes 3 days to get from here to here, then obviously the earliest time we can start number 2 is going to be 3. Okay, so that's how this works out. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this activity here. And if we look at this example here, we have we are doing a house, and we are replacing windows in the lounge, rewiring, replastering the walls of the lounge, refitting the lights in the lounge, decorating the bedrooms, installing the plumbing, decorating the lounge, decorating the kitchens, decorating the bathrooms. And we've labeled these A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. And we're saying that to replace the windows in the lounge, it's going to take 4 weeks, and to rewire the house, it's going to take 4 weeks. And then we've said, replaster walls of lounges, C, and that's going to take 2 weeks. So we can see the duration of weeks that each activity is going to take. Okay, so now let's look at this example and try and kind of work out what's happening here. So we can see that if we start from number 1, node number 1, which has 0 time, and we can see A, so A takes 5 days, 5 weeks. And then with number 2, obviously the earliest this can start is 5 weeks. And we know that at the same time as A is replacing the windows, the rewiring can also take place, and that is going to be 4 weeks, and that 4 weeks goes over here. So again, we do the next one, which is C. So if we go to C, so if we go to C, and in C we've got replastering the walls of the lounge. So C here is replastering the walls, and C takes 2 weeks. So 2 weeks plus the 5 weeks here gives us 7 weeks. So 2 plus 5 gives us 7. And C leads into number 4. So we can see that C leads into number 4 here. But at the same time, we've got D fitting the lights in the lounges, which is also leading in to node number 4. But we don't count this week here in here. We count the longest period of time, which is 5 and 2 weeks, which is 7 weeks. At the same time, we've got decorating the bedrooms, which is 5 weeks. So E, which is here, E, decorating the bedrooms, which is 5 weeks. Okay, so we take the the longest period of time. So 7 plus 4 here is equal to 11. 5 plus 4 here is equal to 9. But if we take F, and F is installing the plumbing, which is 5 weeks, so 5 plus the 4 here gives us 9. And then if we look at H, decorate the kitchens, which is 3 weeks, so 9 plus 3 equals 12. So we can see that this is the longest period of time that it should take. When we look at I, decorate bathrooms, well, that is done at the same time as other activities are being completed in the house. So it doesn't take any longer time for that to be done whilst the the decoration is being done in the kitchens. So the longest period of time this takes is 12 weeks. So we can see how by taking up by taking the different activities here and the duration of the number of weeks, we can actually plot them and we can start to build up a critical path analysis. So in the same way, you can take your work breakdown structure and you can produce a table of all the different activities that need to take place, and you can label them A, B, C, D, E, and F, G, H, and I. And then you can put the duration of time, because remember, it's a duration of time between 1 month and 3 months. So you can put the duration of time and then you can plot it out on your critical path analysis. So, okay, so let's have a look. Okay. Now, we also need to work out the bottom figure, the lowest value. And the way we work out the lowest value is we work backwards. So we actually start from here. Here is where we start. So, so we start from here. You have to excuse my handwriting. So we start from and we work backwards. So how do we actually get backwards? We work backwards from the last node. So if we're working backwards, where's my monitor gone? So let's take, for example, so we can see that if we take 12, which is what we had here, 12, the lowest one here, minus the 4. So if we've got 12 minus 4 gives us 8. And 8 minus 2 equals 6. So we work backwards to get the the latest time that we need to complete it by in order to meet the timescales and the budgets. So if we've got 12 here, so back here, 5. Here we've got 9. Minus the 5 gives us 4. And 4 minus 4 gives us 0. So if we work backwards, we can work out the the latest possible time that we need to complete the project in order for the whole project, to be completed on. There is another example here, and I would like you guys to try and do this example by yourself. So you have the activity here of baking a loaf of bread. You got weigh, the mix, the dough, prepare, preheat, knock back, second, cooking. So, and you've got this in times of minutes. So now what you need to do by yourself is to try and draw this critical path by yourself. The solutions here for you, but actually tried it out yourself. For you to try, again, I would like you to try this activity yourself. Solutions to the question. Okay, so we've basically done it's been over 2 hours, but we've really covered everything that we need to cover. We've actually looked at the questions, and we've said to ourselves, well, what are the questions in the assessment criteria? Because no matter what we're doing, we always have to make sure that we answer the assignment questions in the assessment criteria. And when we look at the questions, we must highlight the key words, because it's all good and well just looking at the question and answering the question, but we must answer the question in relation to the key words. So if it says to explain, then you go into detail. If it says to evaluate, then you need to weigh up the pros and cons, which is a different type answer. So it's important to look at the questions and the key words to those questions. We've looked at the assignment brief template, and the assignment brief template is to do, a project and report this in a report format of 3,000 words plus or minus 10%. And it takes you through all the different stages. We used and we looked at a traditional waterfall management approach for the project, which included, discussing the project life cycle and the project management process. Very, very important to distinguish between the two. As we said before, the project life cycle are the different stages of the project, whereas the project management process are the different stages to actually complete the project. And those processes included the initiation stage, the planning stage, the execution stage, the monitoring, controlling, and the closing stage. And then within each stage, there were sub-stages. So in the initiation stage, you had the project charter, and to identify the key stakeholders. In the planning stage, you had the project requirements, the scope, the work breakdown structure, the schedule, the budget, and then we added in the risk and change control management as well. So, and then after that, that led us into the scope baseline, including the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, and also, if you remember, we included the work breakdown dictionary. So please remember that. And then after that, we went into execution, monitoring, controlling, and then closure. We then looked at agile approach, and we looked at briefly when and where agile is used and how it differs from a traditional waterfall approach, because that's important as well, because the questions actually asks you to critically assess the use of different methodologies and why you're using this as opposed to another methodology. So you need to provide some critical analysis of why you're using this approach as opposed to another approach. And then finally, we looked at critical path. So I've kind of like explained to you nodes, and on the left hand side of the node you have a number, and then on the top half, the time it normally takes to do it and the latest possible time at the bottom. The arrows represent the direction, and then if it's an item A, and then how many weeks or days it will take or time period it will take below that arrow. And so moving forward, and we worked through those, and then to get the least amount of time that it takes for the project to be on time, we worked backwards. We worked backwards to get the bottom figure on the right hand side. And then I provided with you 2 more examples for you to complete by yourselves. The answers are actually there to show you that what the critical path is, and also how to calculate it as well. So you do need to also provide a critical path analysis for your project, and this is easily done once you've completed your work breakdown structure and your costings. Costings will obviously link into your work breakdown structure, and then you would put costings for each section and each element within each subsection. So I hope that has helped, and that has been from today from Mr. Tan. We're looking at project management at Coventry. Thank you. Bye-bye.